people have a tendency to personify power. Even educated people start referring to like the president's domestic agenda, or how the president's going to tackle unemployment, not realizing that the president has no authority in those areas, is not meant to have any authority in those areas, and there would be no reason for a president to have an economic plan at all. The personification of power suggests that Americans, or people in general, are naturally monarchists. That's the primal ingrained idea that power is the father of the family, and it's concentrated in one person, at least symbolically, and that person is responsible for everything that happens. So presidents are seen as dictators, as leaders, not just of the country, but of the free world. And I have to chuckle at this stupidity. Presidents are not meant to have much power. It was originally a part-time job. And their goal essentially was to oversee their cabinet, which they could hardly do. And then the cabinet, of course, is meant to enforce the laws passed by Congress. The president can say yes or no, and that's about it. Foreign policy is a little different. Now, in America, foreign policy is run largely by corporate capital, energy companies, military suppliers, of course the big banks, certain manufacturing concerns, computers, automotive. They have a small army of researchers and policy people, and they staff the big think tanks. And presidents, have no particular. When was the last president that had any knowledge of foreign policy? Richard Nixon, for better or for worse, was probably the last one that had any functional knowledge. Woodrow Wilson, probably before him. So they're quite explicitly meant to be figureheads. But that concept is not really an insult. I think the Federalist Party understood that that power has to be personified. In the colonial era, George III was the symbolic head of the British Empire that was allegedly oppressing the Americans. George III had very little power in general, and certainly had very little power over the colony. It was the Parliament that profited from that, and that created that whole system. And of course, you had these, like the British East India Company, these public-private, like state universities today. They're privately run, but they're chartered by the state. They're enforced monopoly. Those are the entities that had power. But how can you personify that in a poster or in rhetoric? So this, the picture of a big fat king on a throne worked quite a bit. In my last podcast, I spoke about Rasputin, and they loved that image. The guy dressed in black with the long beard, and it was so easy to personify a guy like him. Even more so. I mean, Nicholas and Alexander were fairly popular, and the economy had done well up until that point, and so they needed someone else, and that's what that role. So you're talking about the politics as a theater of the irrational. The problem is that liberal democracy and the free market are based entirely on the rationality of people who are living within it. Liberal democracy believes that human beings are seekers of truth, not self-interest. That they are objective, that they are willing to weigh. I mean, the whole concept of political debate, open debate and discussion is prefaced on that idea, and that when they go to the polls, they have a lengthy list of reasons pro and con for each one. Now, no one believes that. We have to thank psychology for the revelations that we all could see every day, that people are irrational, that people are almost completely unaware of their motives, that they can lie to themselves so well that they truly believe what they're doing is okay. And none of us are innocent of that. None of us are. I mean, part of the Orthodox life, though, is to look at yourself as objectively as humanly possible, which is awful at first, because you don't usually see anything good. The more objective you look, the better off you'll become. Nothing bad can come of truth. Nothing bad could come of a lifestyle that's based on it, even if it's painful. And the free market, of course, is similar. It assumes that people have full, Adam Smith said explicitly, that people have full knowledge of the products that they're buying and can compare and contrast, that they know the sellers, usually personally, that they know what their self-interest is, they know what they need versus what they want, and they know how to budget their money such that it all works out. No one believes it. So you have a political system, a social system, an economic system based on things that psychology has blown out of the water.
Now, I want to give broader context here. I've been a professional academic researcher in philosophy, politics, and history for 3 separate fields for 28 years. I've done nothing else but this for almost 30 years. It's staggering, the sheer amount of material I've been through, good, bad, and indifferent. I have 8 books out. I've taught all over the country. I've been through hell, marriage, divorce, everything else. But let me tell you, and this is very relevant to what we're going to talk about here, I have a list of things, general truths that I've learned, things that I've learned I didn't want to learn. Things that I wish weren't true. These are things that only experience can teach you. And let me summarize them briefly. Number 1, almost all historical knowledge that the average educated American has is sheer fantasy. And they have no way of correcting that, really. Number 2, truth is almost never a concern for people when it comes to making general decisions, especially about who they are, their identity, their mission, what they're going to support and not. Number 3, freedom is a meaningless abstraction. The term freedom abstractly is something that people love, but the minute you say that you are then responsible for what you do with that freedom, they hate it. They want to be empowered, but they forget that power is in fact an awful burden. Number 4, humans are not rational, and therefore they're not free. Rationality is hard. Rationality is difficult. Freedom is almost impossible for most people because that means you have to use critical reason all the time. Number 5 is that to be human, you have to be both rational and free. That's the nature of humanity. Otherwise, you're just this hunk of flesh on 2 legs. So number 6, free will is a result of ascetic struggle and study. No one's born this way. Free will, if it's really free and it's really willful, is usually nothing but pain. Number 7, the individual is a myth. The individual doesn't even make sense. Nothing that the individual does actually belongs to him. The technology that I'm using, the language that I'm using, the logic that I'm using, the historical knowledge, none of this is mine. Nothing. Individualism is a contradiction because the minute you try to defend it, you're using communal property, logic, knowledge, emotion, the language and gestures and the whole community of meaning that you have to have for any words that we use to make sense. The individual is ridiculous and did not exist really until industrialization. Number 8 is one of the hardest ones. And that is that people want to hear only what serves their interest. Number 9, very few people are capable of love. And that includes children. Loving their children. Love is very difficult. Love is as difficult as analysis. Self-interest is the dominant emotion, and that's the very opposite of love. At the same time, number 10, very few people are capable of sustained thought. So what I mean to say is that reason and things that go into reason, like evidence, they're almost never the cause of anyone adopting some opinion. Number 12, people can rationalize anything. It's one of the most horrible things to learn. Women are better at this than men are, but everyone does it. That means you can never trust anyone. When you live in a society where there is no truth, and therefore you could rationalize anything. Number 13, today in universities, serious historical criticism is almost non-existent. Number 14 sounds odd, but there are people out there who have never suffered. You think everyone has problems, everyone suffers. I'm telling you that there are a few people out there who have never suffered a day in their lives. Number 15, insanity. That is to say, to be a psychopath is far more common than people realize. Number 16, people lie constantly. And it gets to the point where often they don't know the difference one way or the other. And finally, most arguments come down to disagreements over the meaning of terms. So even if you assume that someone knows how to think rationally, which is only a handful of people, and it's very hard to do, the terms that we use, today's English bears very little resemblance to the English even just a century ago. Words have radically changed their meanings, both in terms of what they connote and what they denote. That group of 17 things is the result of a lot of pain and a lot of suffering. I didn't know any of this when I first went to college. But there is no escaping it. People know that this is true, but they hate to say it, and they don't want to believe it. Because if this is true, then ideologies like liberal democracy, human rights, the free market, they'll have to go out the window. Because none of them make any sense if those 17 things, or even half of them, are true. We assume, these ideologies assume that the average person, say the average educated person, be nice about it, can identify their self-interest. That I know doesn't exist. And I'll tell you why here in a minute. That they can tell the difference between the common good and their own good. That they can act in the most efficient way possible. That their major decisions are based on facts and sound reasoning, not emotion or some other heteronymous drive. We assume, and this is not a rational assumption, that people seek to avoid harm and pursue the good. And finally, that a moral community exists within which people can think and act. But that's just a smattering of things that one has to assume if you want to make, the free market or human rights or liberal democracy make any sense. I wrote the book, The Third Realm. I was 29, I think. I had a young family. And the book was angry. So those of you who've read it, there's a lot of it that I would retract today. Not the general thrust, of course, but I was angry. And I was angry because I was just learning these things. For decades, I've slaved over difficult texts and translation. I've built arguments in the most painstaking fashion, only to leave the academy and to learn that evidence and logic are of no interest to people. Or it only works if they're rationalizing something. The anger that I felt, the anger that I continue to feel in my writing, and it's certainly there, comes from this fact. Now, the Third Realm, there's much there that I would change. But the Third Realm really, as I said before, it turned out to be an outline of what the rest of my life was going to be. And to that extent, I'm very proud of it. The general argument, of course, is simple. The general argument of that book, and it became the dominant argument of my career, is that there's really only one choice in politics: monarchy or oligarchy. The common good or self-interest. And self-interest always devolves to mean the interest of the powerful. See, if you preach self-interest, and that you should be free, free in quotes, to pursue your own interests, the assumption there's a lot of assumptions behind that. And this is why I say that, rationality is so hard and is so rare. Because part of what it does is take something like, a simple, a concept like that, and sees how many assumptions it's based upon that no one would ever accept. I hated the notion that, let me put it like this. I lost my train of thought there, but let me put it like this. People in the public arena, anything from like a discussion at a bar to, congressional debates, they rely on arguments. The entire judicial system relies on arguments. But I'm telling you that one of the most difficult things to do intellectually is to build an argument. Debating for me, which I only do verbally, is really getting boring. because even basic logical designs are beyond even academics. You know what graduate school is, in both the humanities and the social sciences, is how to construct an argument. That's all it is. They assume that you're learning about the content of your field. They just take that for granted. What they talk about is the form. And as I've gotten older, I've realized just how significant that is. Building an argument is really hard. Building an argument takes a lot of work, and we all make and have made fallacious arguments in the past, because it's very easy to do. It's this intricate weaving of facts under the genesis of a major premise that then gets unpacked through the minor premises and inferred to a conclusion. It's like painstaking. I say that, debate is boring because even those basic overarching arguments are stated in fallacious terms. When I say fallacies, I'm referring to things like, affirming the consequent, hasty generalizations, the misuse of induction, the inability to tell the difference between a contingent and necessary truth, the inability to tell the difference between something that's necessary and something that's sufficient. There's so many elements here. Just basic, the concept of inference. The informal fallacies like, misleading vividness or bandwagoning or emotional reasoning, arguments to authority, equivocation. I mean, that's constant. That is everywhere. We all are guilty of it, sometimes without realizing it. But, you build an argument. You start off with a premise. That's when this is right off the bat, people fail miserably. Because a premise is an assumption. It's an assumption everyone believes it to be true. You can't even begin speaking unless you have a premise. It's an axiom, so to speak. It's a proposition that gives reasons and evidence, for accepting some other proposition drawn from it. And the conclusion, which is also a proposition, so to be established on the basis of the other propositions that derive, in fact, from the premise. Under the premise, you have the minor premises. These are specific elements. This is how you're unpacking the premise. These are supposed to be really in the premise, just you don't realize that. The point of argument really is to say that the premise contains implications that few people, non-specialists don't know about. These are the foundation of inferences, derived either empirically or rationalistically or deductively. And the difference between the two is that inductive reasoning is conventional and contingent, while the rationalist mentality, the deductive mentality, is formally true. It has to be true. Absolute truth, truth by definition, are deductive, assuming that the premise is true. But without a premise, everything else is just random observation, because unity comes before multiplicity. In a valid argument, if the premises are true, then the conclusion has to be true. It's impossible for the premises of a valid argument to be true while the conclusions fall. But of course, this exists within a universe of meaning, a well-defined world. Terms have to be defined and agreed upon. Empirical truths are contingent. So when someone says science has proven X, Y, and Z, you laugh at them. So you don't even understand what contingent truths are. Science is, at its best, strictly an empirical set of observations. They try to minimize the number of axioms that they have. It's loaded with assumptions and crap like that, and most of it is garbage. What was science 100 years ago, we laugh at today. But how many times does someone say science has proven something? Well, that's not possible. Science can suggest something, because it's not absolute truth and contingent truth. But contingency and non-contingency are formalities. Empirical thinking requires a large number of premises, including you have to assume that universal truths exist in the first place, or there's no point in doing anything. So a sound argument has true premises, clear terms, and the inferences make sense. They're fully explicable by the presented information in both formal and in terms of its content. Now, why do I mention this? Well, first of all, it's not mentioned enough. We're living in a society where what I just laid out is Greek to most people. Media empires, politicians, professors especially, most clergy, they exist. Their entire world is based on people not knowing what a fallacy is. Equivocation is one of the nasties. The occult sciences use equivocation a lot because they never use words in the normal sense of the term, but they're acting like they are. But our world is a living horror because humans can't reason. But what are the things that dominate people's thinking? Well, people are ruled by majorities, not wanting to be alone. They're ruled by media images that dictate what is real and what isn't, what's an acceptable opinion, what isn't. Social force, the demand for conformity. The most powerful for men, the sex drive, of course. Everything's driven by that. The desire to fit in, the desire to be liked or something. I say that because one of the things that's noticeable is the weird. Every presidential race, I always laugh because they think the president is this godlike being. If he is elected, therefore that group that he represents has taken over, like it's a coup. Presidents have minimal power, even in foreign policy. Foreign policy, they have to deal, as I said, with corporate capital, who already has an army in place, deeply involved in these policy areas. Of course, the specialist committees in the House and Senate dealing with certain geographic areas also do most of the research. The State Department and DOD have hundreds of thousands now of unionized, experienced bureaucrats who aren't going anywhere. And they continue their work. It doesn't matter who's president. So I always use the example of Italy, that from 1945 to I think the early 90s, they had a government every few months. It just rose and fell. Parties, it was a joke. It was nothing was legitimate after Mussolini. I think it was a new government every 9 or 10 months, if I'm not mistaken, in Italy. And yet at the same time, she was stable. She developed into a major industrial power, part of NATO and everything else, no differently than any other society in Western Europe. Well, that proves then that politicians don't matter. What matters is bureaucracy, the private sector, the media, for good or for ill. So I want to remind people of that. I'm trying to stay above the garbage that's going on. In the post the Trump election, his election doesn't mean that the right wing has taken over. It doesn't mean that the government is now controlled by him. That's ridiculous. It doesn't mean that he's going to fix things. He doesn't have that power. That would be, no one would have agreed to that in the convention debates in the late 18th century when the U.S. was being formed. The presidential power, in fact, was the subject of tremendous debate. Everyone thought he had too much power, so that was constantly pared back. Always remember that the U.S. government as a machine was meant to be slow, irritating, cumbersome, and really pretty much a failure. And that's a good thing, because that means they can't take the place of natural institutions like local governments and families and guilds, who were supposed to have power. The whole point of creating a constitution where you have three branches always fighting each other is that powerful people will go there to carve out their territory, but they'll be too busy with turf wars to worry about what's going on at home. And it's a failure, not because of any lack of wisdom on the founders of the Federalist Party, but because there's no way they could have predicted the massive conglomerate that has more power, than all 18th century governments put together. They could never have even conceived of those conglomerates having media control, deciding not only what's true and what's false, but what's real, who's guilty, who's innocent, what issues are important, what politicians you're going to vote for, what you wear, what you listen to. Again, no one's innocent of that either. Now, therefore, they could not see that. They couldn't see
the sheer size of the federal bureaucracy. And they could not possibly have predicted, in the Federalist Party anyway, that these conglomerates would work together and create this hybrid, this kind of a monster of corporate capital and the public sector. So I need to say that, given the fact that debates in America have largely ceased, the only way to have a real debate is someone who you know, who respects you already, and so you can have a familiar discussion. Two strangers, it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. The ego, the emotions, the creation of this monstrous human being, the media has pulled off, make discussion impossible. People don't seek truth; they seek power, they seek justification, they seek pleasure. So that's really all irrelevant anyway. But if you're going to debate somebody, you do it only once you realize that the person is an honest seeker, a person who's come to their opinion, however erroneous, honestly. And that your job then is, the word dialectic refers to just this: two people who know each other, two people who have a lot in common. They speak the same language, they're part of the same entity. They're divided over a specific issue, and when they discuss it, slowly the resolution will show itself. So debate, in the Greek concept of dialectics was people of the same ethnic group, speaking the same language, who generally agreed on most things. And then the debate would develop only because the end goal was the same. They wanted they wanted peace with a faction or something. Everyone agreed with that. It just, the debate was over how to do it. So you can't have debate in a multicultural society by definition. In the original sense of the word dialectic. Dialectic referred to people who are part of one body coming to agreement over something through discussion. The assumption there is that they're honest, that they know how they're using terms, that they're both at the same educational level, same experience, that they're speaking the same language in all senses of the word, and they have a lot in common. Otherwise, there is no debate, there's only power. But apart even from that, rationality is dying. I've been spending a lot of time studying logical fallacies recently, because I'm realizing that even highbrow debates are loaded with them. People don't understand even basic logical progression anymore, and you can't point it out to them because then you get yelled at. You're an elitist and everything else.